Welcome to School Britannia, the podcast where two Aussies teach Brits their own history. This is my friend Claire.
And this is my friend Ellie.
How you going, Claire?
I'm really good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty good.
Do you think we sound really good, Ellie?
I think we do, Claire.
Why could that be?
It's because we have such good voices for radio.
We do. We're amazing.
But we also bought a recorder.
It's history ASMR.
ASMR.
1066.
William the Conqueror.
Battle of Hastings.
I can't think of any.
War of the Roses. Lots of weird royal stuff.
Henry VIII. And Anne Boleyn getting her head chopped off.
We're taking this too far now.
Yeah.
But we do have a new recorder, so hopefully we sound nicer to your ears.
We hope you can hear us as you're walking along the street.
Yeah, you don't have to listen in a padded room
No.
anymore.
You can take us anywhere. We'll be good.
Like maybe to a protest, Ellie? I feel like that's something you did this week.
It is something that I did this week. I went to the Youth Strike for Climate.
Nice.
The Youth Climate Strike.
Excellent.
Youth Climate Strike.
Supporting our youths.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was so inspiring. It was basically run by 15-year-olds.
Yep.
Like put together and run by 15-year-olds.
Yeah, it's great. It was very much like kids asking adults to come and be supportive.
Totally.
Which is really cool.
I felt like an ally, even though it's my world too. But
yeah.
I mean, even someone 10 or 15 years younger than me, they're going to be suffering those consequences in probably a more intense way for longer than me, because I'll be dead.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I did not go because I was sick.
Yeah.
But it was really cool to see everyone sharing all the pictures and all the great signs people were carrying. And
it was a really good energy. It was really good.
That's great.
And there were some really little kids there as well. So it was the sort of one of the main spokespeople was a young person called Dylan who was so eloquent and just I don't know, just put everything in such simple, clear terms. It was really wonderful to listen to him.
I think kids are really good at cutting through bullshit, which I think is part of the reason why this movement has been so exceptional.
Yeah. And there was also a 10-year-old girl and her little brother who got up to talk as well. And they'd been striking since February.
Good on them.
Yeah, they're going down to Parliament and just standing there and just wanting to have a chat about why Scottish Parliament isn't doing more.
It's so cool.
It's so cool.
But also they shouldn't be compromising their educations to remind us all that this is an issue. So
exactly,
get off your asses and do something about it.
Amen.
I have a wee history nugget for you, Ellie.
Oh my God, really?
So one of my favourite things about this podcast is that we are constantly learning.
So much.
And I feel like every time we do an episode for like the next month afterwards, all I do is learn several more things about that topic and I want to share more.
You had said.
Yeah,
absolutely.
This is actually about both of our episodes.
Yeah.
Episode 12, Boston Marriages and Anne Lister. Mm-hmm. Cracking episode, if I do say so myself.
That's pretty good.
But when we recently did some secret podcast business with
secret
hidden tracks,
yes,
you should check out. They do cool
really
walking tours.
Walking tours, yes.
I did a little bit of extra research on the Edinburgh Seven and Sophia Jex-Blake.
Yeah, who was the incredible doctor.
Yes, who kicked it all off.
Yes.
And I found out that she herself lived in a Boston marriage for most of her life.
Oh, Sophia!
Yeah, Dr. Margaret Todd.
Oh, another doctor.
Yeah, they retired down in Surrey together.
Oh, that's
and lived
so
in a Boston
lovely.
marriage. Yeah, It's so sweet. There's so many incredible women throughout history who lived in these beautiful unions and defied expectations and just wanted to be themselves and be happy.
And be in a partnership that was mutually supportive.
Yeah.
Which so much of the time heteronormative sexual relationships were not.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's cool. I just keep finding out people who are in Boston marriages and it's just thrilling. I love it. It's making me really happy.
All the coolest people in history were in Boston
marriages. Damn straight.
That is a great history nugget.
Thank you.
I like it. So I have a little podcast recommendation.
Do tell.
It's kind of related to what I'll be talking about today. It's just a really simple one. It's the Guardian in Focus podcast.
Oh, yeah. So good.
Quite bad at reading the news because I find it, like most of us, I find it pretty overwhelming. But the Guardian in Focus puts everything in focus. So they pick a topic of the day and they talk about it with one of their journalists who's an expert in it, who's been working on a piece, like maybe like doing heaps and heaps of research into one particular area. And they do, I mean, they do lots of Brexity things right now because that's such a massive issue right now.
Yes.
But they also do like, oh man, how dangerous is chlorinated chicken?
Yes.
Edward Snowden, life after leaking. All sorts of stuff to do with Hurricane Dorian.
Yeah.
The Amazon rainforest and all this stuff, which just, I don't know, it gets your feet back on the ground and tells you about stuff that's really, really important at the moment and that you should be paying attention to.
And it's the kind of in-depth journalism that I think we're missing with all these like headline-grabbing events that are happening.
Exactly.
It's really well done.
Really
and it's such an easy listen. Like, it doesn't feel like they're talking down to you, and it doesn't feel like they're being elitist.
No, the language is really good. Anushka Astana, who runs it, is such an incredible journalist, and I really like the way she puts things in context. She's awesome.
There's a great recommendation.
Yeah, thanks.
So, Ellie, what are you going to be teaching me about today?
What do you know about prorogations?
I know that Boris Johnson has used it to his advantage recently, but that is it.
That's a good summary. I don't know if I really need to do my podcast now. It's
Yay, done. You can't teach me anything.
So, a prorogation, Prorogation, prorogation.
Shit.
I
remember when it first came up.
You were like,
a few weeks ago, I was like, duh.
What the? Yeah, me
Someone's
too.
misspelled something in this article I'm reading.
Yeah, because it looks so weird. It's a super old-fashioned word.
Yeah.
So a prorogation is just the formal name given to the period between the end of a session of Parliament and the state opening Parliament that begins the next session. So it's just...
So it's like when Parliament ends and when Parliament reopens.
Exactly.
So technically all the summer sessions that they take are technically prorogations.
No. So in Australia, we have prorogations, but we have them in time with the election.
Oh, okay.
So a session of Parliament will go however long that government is in.
Yes.
So in Australia, that's 3 years.
Oh, okay.
And we just time our prorogations to be when the election cycle starts.
Right.
And Parliament and the Senate both stop sitting and all business finishes until we get a new government.
Ew, so not including holidays?
No, they're just like breaks in the middle of a session. Well, yeah, they're breaks in the middle of a Parliament.
Yes, but it's still the same Parliament when they come back.
Yeah, exactly. And questions might come up again from the last time they were sitting.
Right.
In a prorogation, everything stops. So any bills that were on the table just get taken off the table. Any questions that were hanging don't get answered. Everything finishes. Wow. And then you start again with like a fresh slate. So Parliament can't decide when these happen. In Australia, it's the Governor-General. But as I said, they usually time it to fit with the election cycle. So in the UK, the person who decides when that happens is the Prime Minister and the monarch. They're the decision makers. And it's a prerogative power. So they can decide when they want a prorogation to happen.
So the Prime Minister and the Queen can collude, or the
kind of. So the Prime Minister advises the Queen, and the Queen just kind of has to say yes to whatever.
She's essentially useless to us.
Well, she's not really a monarch. I mean, she's a figurehead, but she shouldn't have any power. She should just be there to follow the rule of the law.
She just shouldn't be there. Sorry. Sorry, my republicanism. So, small sidebar.
Yeah.
Does that mean that when the Governor-General dissolved Gough Whitlam's government in Australia, that was a prorogation as well?
That's right.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it also happened when Harold Holt, so for all of our non-Australian listeners, and maybe some of our Australian listeners, Harold Holt was one of our prime ministers who drowned or maybe got taken by a Japanese submarine. No one's quite sure.
Depends on which conspiracy theory boards you read.
He disappeared in the 60s. My dad actually remembers it. He was down on near Sorrento, and he remembers seeing all the helicopters. Shit. He was a little kid, and he remembers...
Yeah, he went swimming on a beach near, like, in the near
Portsea or it was Sorrento or Portsea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he just went into the beach to go swimming.
It was a dangerous beach.
And everyone was like standing on the beach waiting for him to come back, and he just never came back out of the water.
So Australia just didn't have a Prime Minister, so the Governor-General called Prorogation because
ended Parliament.
Everyone had to sort their shit out and figure out an interim Prime Minister. Like everything just had to pause.
Yeah.
And then we got a new Prime Minister. So that's kind of what you're meant to use it for.
Right.
In the UK and in Australia as well, there are no really strict laws about when a prorogation should be called or how long it should go for.
Right. Is it still called a prorogation in Australia as well? Interesting.
It is. Yeah. It's just we don't use the term very much because it just is never really an issue because by convention we just call it to fit with the election cycle.
Yeah.
So we don't really talk about it much. But we're talking about it here because, as you said, there's a lot going on in the UK right now. And because the Prime Minister has control over prorogation, a lot of people think that Boris Johnson is using it to his advantage. So our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, insists that we will be Brexiting, we'll be leaving the EU on the 31st of October, which is Halloween.
Spooky day for spooky events.
Mm-hmm. And he's insisting that we'll leave with like deal or no deal, no matter what. Even if we haven't got a deal with the EU, we're just leaving.
Which is incredibly stressful.
It's very stressful and could be disastrous for many, many vulnerable people who live in the UK and also in Europe. So the deal option is getting more and more unlikely because the 31st of October is not very far away and because Boris Johnson has prorogued or suspended Parliament. So in recent times, since about the 1930s, prorogations have lasted a mean average of about 5 calendar days. So that's usually how long they go for. This prorogation, which Boris Johnson called on the 10th of September, will last until the 14th of October, Jesus, which is 33 days.
Wow.
That is a really unusually long prorogation.
Yeah.
This is longer than any prorogation in the last 40 years. So it's really unusual. And essentially, it leaves Boris Johnson free of any parliamentary scrutiny because, as I said, during a prorogation, Parliament just shuts down.
Yeah.
They can't ask any questions. They can't
interrogate his actions.
No, nothing. They can do nothing.
Which are extremely suspicious.
They're not called. They're not sitting. They don't exist. So it leaves him free of parliamentary scrutiny until just 18 days before he insists that we are Brexiting, deal or no deal.
Not a long time to deal with a national/international crisis of this magnitude.
And it's just 3 days before a crucial summit of EU leaders on the 17th of October.
Jesus.
So Johnson claims that this is just a bog standard prorogation.
It's not bog standard when they never happen except for elections.
Well, no, so in the UK, sorry, maybe I've misled you. So in Australia, prorogations fit with the election cycle.
Yes.
In the UK, they don't.
Oh. So they have done this in the past.
Yeah. This happens quite regularly, but they usually only go for 5 days, which isn't very full on. Because it just marks the end of one session of Parliament and another session of Parliament. And they don't necessarily fit with the election cycle.
Yes, I did misunderstand that.
Yeah, I shouldn't have talked about Australia so much. That's probably what was confusing.
No, I love it.
So in the UK, usually a session of Parliament doesn't go for very long. So this sitting of Parliament that just ended with this prorogation, it has been sitting since June 2017 with breaks, but it's been the same session. It's been the same session of Parliament since June 2017, which is the longest session in 400 years. Yeah. So usually sessions don't go for nearly that long. And the Prime Minister just calls a prorogation every so often, like every...
Okay. Tidies up business.
Yeah,
small
exactly.
break, start again.
Totally. But it's usually only 5 days between sessions.
Right.
Because that's to have Parliament not sitting for a month and
huge.
Not be able to discuss anything and have everything end and then start again a month later is full on. Does that make sense?
Yes, I get it now. Sorry.
Yeah. So
I did just get really excited about understanding a bunch of things about Australian history.
It's so confusing. So Johnson's saying that this is just a normal prorogation because this has been a really long sitting. The longest.
I get it, but when it's 6 times longer than your average prorogation, it's not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the timing is a little too convenient for someone who doesn't seem to like having to answer to Parliament and who seems to also be losing the confidence of the House.
Hugely.
So Boris Johnson isn't really winning votes in Parliament right now.
Yeah.
So prorogations can be pretty useful in the UK.
Yeah, I guess if they're doing them a lot, they've obviously done them a lot in the past, and I doubt he's the first person to have used them to his advantage.
That's very astute, Claire.
Tell me the history nugget.
There's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, no one's original.
So a lot of people have been comparing Boris Johnson to Charles I.
Oh, really?
Yeah, not so much the hair, but both of them have terrible hair.
All his own.
Mostly their shared belief in their divine right to rule.
Oh, God.
What do you know about Charles I?
Almost nothing.
Do you know about the choppy choppy?
No.
So Charles I had his head chopped off.
Aw, baby.
Yeah, because he kept fucking with Parliament. So a lot of people have been saying, Boris, you better watch out, which is a bit full.
Yeah, it's a little threatening in this day and age.
Okay, I'll tell you about Charles I. So Charles I was James I of England and 6th of Scotland's son.
Yes.
So James I/6th is Mary Queen of Scots' son.
Right.
And therefore he united the crowns in a way because he was the King of Scotland and the King of England, which is the first time that had happened.
Yeah.
So he's quite important. Charles was born in Fife.
Oh, nice.
Just over the water. We can see Fife from Leith on a nice clear day, which is not today. It's a lovely view. And he was born on the 19th of November, 1600. So it's always really easy to calculate how old he is.
Great.
It's just the year number. And Charles was convinced that he didn't need a parliament in order to rule England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, because he thought, as king, he had a divine right.
I mean, that's kind of how it works a little bit. I mean, I'm not saying he has a divine right to rule. I just mean that royalty is we're here because God thinks we're better than all of you.
Totally.
So I'm not surprised that really went
that's
to his
why
head.
He thought that.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when Charles came to the throne in 1625, Parliament was totally a thing in England. It wasn't just a king
Too late.
doing whatever he wanted.
Magna Carta?
Well, yes, that is a good... I'm going to talk about the Magna Carta. Yeah, right now, in fact.
Oh, excellent.
We should just do this together every time.
No.
So Parliament has been a thing since 1215 when, as you said, the landowners of England made King John of Robin Hood fame sign the Magna Carta.
God, I forget how early it was.
I know, such a long time ago. So that meant that he wasn't allowed to collect tax without the consent of his royal council, which gradually developed into a parliament.
Yeah.
So it just meant that the king didn't have absolute power to raise taxes whenever he wanted without talking to anyone.
It's so interesting to think that the British monarchy hasn't had absolute power since the 1200s.
Mm-hmm.
That's mad. That's a really long time to have not actually had power but still be ruling.
So we've got Charles I on the throne in 1625 with a parliament that's kind of been going since 1215.
Yeah.
And they're not keen on the king just being able to do whatever he wants.
And he's not keen on being told that there are limitations to what he can do.
Totally.
Because he's 25 and egotistical.
Totally. So Magna Carta, then time wore on and Parliament worked to limit the power of the monarch more and more and more. So by the time we get to James, they were like, nah, bitch, you can't do anything. In 1628, Parliament made the king assent to the Petition of Right, which said that the king couldn't raise taxes without Parliament's permission. So he couldn't get money from anyone without running it by Parliament first.
Good.
Yeah, I think that sounds good too. But Charles worked out that as long as he didn't have any major costs, so wars, for example, he kind of didn't need the advice or consent of Parliament to rule England, Wales, Ireland, and Scotland. So he pulled a Boris Johnson and prorogued the Parliament of England in 1629.
Hey!
Bang, bang, bang. When the Speaker, Sir John Finch, tried to adjourn the House on the King's command, he was forcibly held down in his chair by 3 members, Sir John Eliot, Denzil Hollis, and Benjamin Valentine, while the Commons passed a number of motions against the King's recent actions just before Parliament was suspended.
Wow.
I know. So they were like, oh my God, this is so stressful. Because when he prorogues Parliament, they are completely powerless.
Yeah. So they tried to stop the Speaker going ahead with the prorogation.
So that they could pass a few more laws quickly.
Yeah, which a bunch of people from Labour didn't actively and didn't physically try to do, but they were
trying to delay the prorogation for sure. Yeah, so that has happened again.
Shit.
I know. So Charles didn't call Parliament back into session until 1640.
Whoa!
So he prorogued it in 1629 and he called it back into session in 1640.
Holy shit!
So this period is called the Era of Personal Rule, or sometimes the 11 Years' Tyranny, which I quite like.
Yeah.
Because that's what it was.
Yeah.
So as I said, Charles, he was in a tricky position because he was essentially ruling without the power to raise taxes in any normal way, because all of that power was held by Parliament, which he had prorogued.
Yes.
But you still need money to run a kingdom.
Yes.
And he was running a few kingdoms, like he was running England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland, which were all quite different at the time.
You need a crown for each one, and that costs money.
It does. And ermine cloaks and nice shoes.
Dyeing things in purple. Yeah. Back in the day, very expensive process.
Collect all those little shells and crush them up.
Yep.
So, during this time, Charles raised pretty much every tax he was allowed to raise without the permission of Parliament. So this is the King's prerogative.
Right.
So the King still had a few powers that were just his. So these are some of the ways that he raised money, and they're super sketchy.
Oh, God.
One is called ship money, which basically meant that Charles made seaside towns pay him taxes that were usually only raised during times of war for shipbuilding. So during a time of war, the king could say to a small seaside town, build us a ship. Because the Spanish are invading or the French are invading. You have to
The British are coming.
Totally, the British are coming. You have to bear the cost of building us a ship so we can defend ourselves. And if they couldn't build a ship, they were obliged to pay ship money to the king so that he could pay someone else to build a ship. They weren't really at war right now, but Charles was just like, give me ship money.
Wow.
Because that's one of the only ways I can raise money.
What a dick.
Charles also raised funds. This is so shitty. He raised funds from the Scottish nobility by the Act of Revocation. So he basically said that all gifts of royal or church land made to the nobility since 1540 were revoked, and that now if you wanted to keep them, you had to pay him an annual rent. I know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So anything that the royal family had given to a noble in Scotland since 1540, he was just like, yoink! Now, if you want it back, you have to pay me rent every year.
I don't feel bad for all these rich people having more of their rich people things taken away from them, but it's still shady to give something and then take it back 100 years later just because you're like, oh shit, I need money.
Exactly. It didn't make him popular.
It's like, oh, you know that birthday present I gave you? Cool. I'm going to need that back so I can, pawn it for money.
And if you want it back, you'll have to pay me rent for it every year. In addition, the boundaries of the royal forests in England were extended to their ancient limits as part of a scheme to maximise income by exploiting the land.
So just hunting deer in the king's forest?
Pretty much. So he was just like, I'll have my ancient forests back, thanks. And they belonged to people by now because, I don't know, they were being used by villagers and as common land probably.
Yeah.
And he was just like, nope, this is where the limit is now and you have to pay me if you're going to use this land for hunting or farming or whatever. Yes. Very, very sus. So these weren't super popular choices, as you can imagine.
Oh, I'm not surprised.
And there are more. That was just a select few.
Oh, jeez.
So there was growing discontent in England, but the reason this era of personal rule ended was our lovely home, bonnie Scotland.
Ah, good on you, Scots people.
So on top of all of this taxing stuff, Charles had also been trying to reform the then Episcopal Church of Scotland to bring it into line, especially in its liturgy with the Church of England. Now, as you can imagine, the Scots weren't really down with being brought into line with the English liturgy. So they declared war on England.
Oh, shit.
They went to war. Despite all of the tax raising that Charles had been doing above, that still wasn't really enough money to afford to pay English troops to fight the Scots. So he was obliged in 1640 to call Parliament back.
So they could get at least taxes so they could fight this war.
Exactly.
Smart Scots people.
Yeah.
Smart.
Well, I mean, the Scots weren't really getting
No, but
unless
let's pretend they had a strategy.
Maybe they did. So this was a thing called the Short Parliament. But remember, at this time, Scotland had its own parliament.
Oh, it did?
It had Holyrood up until 1707.
Oh.
So they're separate parliaments right now.
Oh, but so they
Same
hadn't
king.
prorogued the Scottish Parliament,
no.
just Westminster.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh.
Yeah. So in 1707, it was the Union of the Crowns, I think it's called, which is when the Scottish Parliament got dissolved.
Right.
And they were like, we're running everything from Westminster now.
Gotcha.
But at the time of Charles I, Scotland had its own parliament,
Right.
which was separate to England, which is why Scotland could declare war on England,
Yeah.
even though they had the same king.
That's so
Which is pretty weird. Okay, so he called the Short Parliament. They were like, okay, we'll give you taxes so that you can fight off the Scots. And Charles was like, great, thanks. And he dissolved the Short Parliament after only a few days because he'd got the money that he wanted.
Wow.
But by the end of the year, the Scots were still in England and
Yeah, they were.
he couldn't afford to fight them again. So he had no other routes left to him and he summoned a thing called the Long Parliament, which was longer than the Short Parliament. So in the months that followed, Parliament demanded Charles give them heaps more control over how Great Britain ran because they were like, you literally prorogued us for 11 years. We need to sort our shit out, please. But he was a believer in the divine right of kings, our Charles. And
Yes.
he didn't like Parliament telling him what to do.
No.
So he thought, screw this. I'm going to start the English Civil War. So he nipped out of London. I think he went to like Oxford. I'm pretty sure he went to Oxford and he raised an army and was like, I'm going to take Parliament by force. So in 1642, the English Civil War began. And it was basically a war between the Cavaliers on the side of Charles and the Royalists and the Roundheads, which is such a good name, which is the people on the side of Parliament.
Yes.
It was bloody, nasty, especially for Charles, who was charged with and found guilty of high treason when he lost the war and ended up getting his head chopped off in 1649.
I mean, at that point, did they not just go, fuck royals, they're such a nightmare, let's not bother?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
That's
good.
what happened. That's why they chopped his head off. Yes, Claire. Correct.
Cool.
Because then we get Oliver Cromwell,
All right.
who runs...
This is a very, very dark blank page
It's
in my
very-
knowledge of British
It's quite
history.
confusing. It's a
Yeah.
confusing time. So they chopped Charles I's head off, so they're like, great, end the monarchy. We don't have a monarchy anymore.
So smart.
We have Oliver Cromwell, who's going to run Great Britain as a commonwealth. But then it didn't, I mean, it wasn't great
No.
because Cromwell, did terrible things in Ireland. He went to
Yeah.
war in Ireland and murdered many people. And he did things like, he was a Puritan.
Ugh.
So
They're always so sad and repressed and they take it out on everyone else.
Well, he's famous for cancelling Christmas. Literally cancelling Christmas.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, which he didn't actually do. I think one of the other members of his cabinet did that. But the Puritans did cancel Christmas.
So was Parliament at this point elected? Or was it like the House of Lords and it's like, hey,
Yeah.
you were born into the right family with the right amount of wealth.
Yeah.
You can come have decisions and power.
I think so. I should have researched this actually, because I wonder if maybe they were elected by landowners. Like maybe there was suffrage only to a point. Like you could vote.
At which point it's like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess it's still a form of democracy.
Yeah, but you're only electing your peers, so
Totally.
it's really, frankly, quite ridiculous.
Yeah, but you might be a merchant or a
but a rich
farmer.
landowner is going to
Yeah.
elect a merchant.
Of course. But you're not being ruled over by lords necessarily, which at the time would have been heaps more intense than having at least a mix of merchants and farmers and small
suppose.
landowners represented.
Suppose.
But we would need to check. I'm not completely sure. So that brings us back to today.
Ugh.
So it's not completely fair to draw a direct comparison between Charles
Yes, it
I.
is. Yes, it totally is. They're both insane.
I mean, they're not... Boris Johnson isn't an absolutist ruler,
I think he wants to be.
but as a Prime Minister who hasn't faced a general election, he's gained the assent of an unelected monarch to shut down Parliament for over a month.
Yep.
Just before one of the biggest decisions the UK has had to make in decades.
Yep.
So this is an unelected guy asking an unelected woman to shut down a whole group of elected people just before a really, really major change in what the UK is and how it operates.
I know that some of the debate has hinged on whether he gave her his true reason for proroguing Parliament as well. And a lot of people claim that he misled her on his reasoning.
And you've brought me to my next point. You're a mind reader. No, this is perfect. You're leading us down the garden path. I mean, in a good way. Down the garden path in the right direction. So yeah, like you say, some people aren't having it.
I'm not having it. I'm not impressed.
So the guy who prorogued Parliament is once again being brought down by Scotland. Yay! Scotland! So Scotland's highest civil court, Edinburgh's Court of Session, has found that Boris Johnson's actions were motivated by the improper purpose of stymieing Parliament from properly scrutinising the government's Brexit plans.
Yes.
That's big. That's a really big thing. But that's Scotland's highest court. So right now, there's a Supreme Court case happening down in England, and that's to determine whether the prorogation is a matter for the courts, and if so, it will go on to rule definitively on whether Mr. Johnson's true motive was to undermine MPs' ability to legislate and respond to events as the country prepares to leave the EU. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So basically...
what did he tell the Queen? What was his reason?
He told her that we just needed to prorogue Parliament because it's the longest session in 400 years.
It just seems so obvious that that's not why he was doing it.
I know, but she can't really say no. She's not really... She's not... Because she's not a proper...
Yeah.
You know,
I don't think she should have any power, but
No.
I also hate it when she is just such an obvious figurehead and they manipulate her role in government at times like this for their advantage. It's like, can we just not have her now / have a royal family now?
You need someone to perform that function. But at least if you had...
Courts.
Yeah, or like a Governor-General like we have in Australia, like a neutral...
elected position, not someone who, you know, slithered out of the right vagina and therefore gets to be in charge. It's what it is.
Yeah. I don't know if she slithered. Unless she's a reptilian. You know.
They're all reptiles in human suits.
So yeah, they're trying to determine whether Boris Johnson misrepresented what this prorogation was to the Queen to his own advantage. And if the government loses this court case, which we will know by the time you are listening to this, listeners, you will know more than me, oh future people. So we'll know that if the government loses the court case, so if the Supreme Court finds that Boris Johnson was underhanded in his prorogation of Parliament, then Parliament should reconvene next week, which for us is the week beginning the 23rd of September.
Yeah.
And for you guys, might be last week.
Yes.
Will be last week. So you'll know, future people, whether I'm right or wrong. So Parliament should reconvene with the Speaker and the Lord Speaker summoning MPs and peers back to work. So
great.
If they're found to have prorogued Parliament unfairly...
Parliament will come back to session.
That's right. But there's nothing to stop Boris Johnson proroguing Parliament again if he wants to, because that's the way the system works.
I feel like at some point the Queen has to be like, mate, we all know what you're doing. I know I don't have a lot of power here, but you're just being kind of a dick.
Yeah, you would think. But this is the way the law works.
He just makes her look really ineffective and useless, which she's always done a pretty good job at not looking like, even though she is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But she just looks, It
just makes her look weak and powerless and like a puppet.
Yeah. And what's crazy is, so if they win this court case, so if the Supreme Court finds that they didn't act unfairly, Boris Johnson has suggested he'll prorogue Parliament even more, like past Brexit through all of October.
Jesus.
Which would mean you could just take the initiative and, you know, get Brexit with a no deal.
It's so gross.
Just take us out of the EU without talking to anyone or being scrutinised by anyone.
That's so disgusting.
Isn't that mad? But it's just
so
crazy that you are allowed to do that. That's not breaking the law.
Yeah, that's really bad.
Yeah.
They feel like once Parliament's back in session, they should be like, so shall we change the prorogation laws?
Yeah.
Because that seems really fucked up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That the Prime Minister can just decide to do that at any time that is convenient to them.
I can't believe that it hasn't been utilised more, to be honest.
I know, me too. I did look it up. It's been used in times of really, like, dramatic stuff. So, Charles II prorogued the Cavalier Parliament in December 1678 to prevent it continuing with the impeachment of the Earl of Danby, who I guess was a mate. In the Great Reform Crisis in 1831, it hasn't happened.
Yeah, I just feel like it just seems like
much.
the perfect tactic if you don't actually give a fuck about people, which a lot of politicians don't seem to.
Yeah.
And you just want to push your agenda through.
Yeah.
Then just fuck off Parliament and be like, cool, I don't need you. I now have all this power and I can just run around doing what I like without being questioned.
I mean, he can't bring through any new laws, but that doesn't matter with Brexit.
But he can tank the country.
Yeah, because we just automatically Brexit. That's just the fallback.
There has to have been other times where that would have been helpful to get Parliament out of the way.
Yeah, there must have been. It doesn't seem to have happened that much.
Which I hope is because our politicians have more respect for the people who elected their representatives.
But the problem is that it's relying on politicians to be respectful of the process, and Boris Johnson is not.
Yeah, he just does not give a fuck.
He doesn't care. So if you get someone who doesn't think that they have to respect parliamentary processes, they kind of can do with it whatever they want.
Oh, that's so grim.
Yeah. He can't be a dictator. I have to be clear. He can't, like, pass new laws and stuff.
But he's definitely utilising this at that one time in history where he can really fuck shit up.
And it makes me think, because Boris Johnson's an Eton boy.
Ugh.
He must have studied Charles I in school. They must study this.
Yeah.
And it does make me think whether maybe he got a few ideas from old Charlie.
Yes.
And he's just worked out that we don't chop people's heads off anymore.
Maybe we shouldn't teach everyone history.
Maybe we shouldn't. And that's the end of the story. What will you be teaching us about today, Claire?
Well, Ellie.
Yes.
We've talked before, during other topics, about the Industrial Revolution and the terrible conditions of factories at that time.
Yes.
Well, today, we're going deep inside that world.
The sooty world of industrial factories.
Exactly. But we're unionising.
Ooh!
Yeah.
I love a union.
Right? So this is the story of the match girl strikes of 1888.
Oh my god, match girls.
Yeah, right?
Like little match girls?
No. So these weren't ladies selling matches. These were ladies making matches.
Oh shit, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So this is one of those parts of British history that I've known about for like a long time. I feel like it comes up in like books and stuff. Like I couldn't tell you where I first heard about it, but I feel like I eventually then learned about the actual working conditions from like non-fiction stuff I've read. So it's always kind of like been bubbling in the back of my head.
Like general factory conditions during the Industrial
Yes,
Revolution.
and match girls specifically because they worked under some of the worst conditions, as I will tell you about.
Okay.
And I wanted to learn more about that. And then as I looked into it, I was like, damn, these ladies like got it together. And they're really fucking cool.
Great.
Yeah. But first, I have to start by telling you about fire.
I love fire.
Isn't it great?
I've got a little candle burning right over there right now because I love it so much.
Pretty.
Yeah.
Well, during the Industrial Revolution, people were like, hey, we have all these mod cons, we have gas lighting and steam trains and cheap pottery and all these things that you need fires for. So,
pottery. Oh, yeah, of course. You have to fire the pottery.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so fires were being lit all the time, but they were still being lit the same way our cave-dwelling ancestors were doing it.
With wood and sticks.
Well, less of the friction, but more of the flint and stone and that kind of method. Yeah. And people were lighting so many fires, and they're like, there has to be a better way.
So remind me how a flint works.
It's just a bit of flint stone, and you strike it with metal, which...
Metal, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Something
so you
to create a spark.
Carry a bit of flint around in your pocket
I
with
guess.
a bit of metal.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Seemed to be what people did before we invented the first successful friction match in 1826.
Friction.
By John Walker, an English chemist and druggist.
Cool.
It was later improved upon by some French people. This guy, Charles Soria substituted white phosphorus, which is sometimes called yellow phosphorus, for some of the other chemicals that were used in match heads.
Okay.
And these were called Lucifer matches.
Good name.
Yeah. And they were cheap and easy to produce.
Okay.
And so the big draw card of these matches was that they could be struck anywhere on any surface.
Oh, wow.
And it was, the friction caused enough heat to light the match.
So I could strike a match on my wall.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. Can you still get them?
No, and you will find out why.
Okay.
Well, actually, it's not entirely true. You possibly can, but they're not at all common.
Okay.
So these are the matches that our match girls are working with.
Okay.
White phosphorus matches.
All right.
It's like they started.
Strike them on anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But who were they working for?
Good question.
They were working for 2 Quaker merchants.
What?
Because you know I love bringing up Quakers.
I don't get it. Quakers are meant to be nice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of sad that they're not. It's like you're letting down the side.
Yeah.
They're just, Quakers, such a complicated, interesting history. So Francis May and William Bryant set up their partnership in 1843, first to import general goods, including matches, but then they eventually just began manufacturing the matches themselves.
Okay.
So to be clear, this is not the Bryant May that exists still today. That is a different company.
Don't pick at them.
Yes. Do not bring up slander charges against me. They were the only company making matches, but they were the biggest in the market.
Okay.
And oh, what a market it was, Ellie.
Did the people like matches?
They liked them a lot. How many matches do you think we used in Britain every day?
Oh my god. Every day.
Every day.
1 million?
250 million matches every day in Britain. People were obsessed. But you had to light fires for everything.
But what was the population of Britain back then?
Small.
Yeah.
Tiny
There's
population.
So many matches.
Yeah. But every single fire you wanted to light, and you had to light a fire for everything.
Yeah.
All needed a match. And there were these cool matches you could just strike anywhere and throw away, and you were done. And it was so easy.
Wow.
So why not just light a match and light your candles and light your gas lanterns
and your everything.
Yeah.
Wow.
So people using a fuck ton of matches. And by 1860, Bryant and May were selling 27.9 million boxes a year.
Holy moly.
Yep. So the next year, they set up shop on a 3-acre site on Fairfield Row in Bow, East London.
Okay.
And they were making money hand over fist. Dividends of 22.5% in 1885 and 20% in 1886 and 1887 were paid out to shareholders.
Whoa,
They had that much profit that they were just,
money.
actually paying out a fuck ton to shareholders.
Wow.
Yeah. And because capitalism, we know no one's making money like that without exploiting someone somewhere else down the chain.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, oh no.
Yeah, this is bad. This is bad, Ellie.
We don't like capitalism.
No. So who were these match girls? This is going to get real bleak, so prepare yourself.
Okay.
But then, bless them, the unions come and save us all.
Okay,
so there's a happy ending.
Good.
So I mentioned Bryant and May factory was in East London.
Yeah.
At the time, East London was a place of extreme deprivation, populated by the chronically poor and unemployed and characterised by disease, dirt and poverty.
Great.
Any work that was going was sweatshop work. Like, this part of London is where that term came from.
Really?
And that's what the match girls were doing. Wealthier people of the day treated the area like a foreign country, and some even compared it to a living hell.
Oh my god.
'Tis a grim place.
Yeah. Oh.
It's basically everything you've ever read in a Dickens novel.
Okay.
Or not, if you're me and you refuse to read Dickens, but it's that vibe.
Like Oliver.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, in the Bryant and May factory, it was women and girls from this super grim East London, and they were mostly Irish immigrants or the descendants of Irish immigrants.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. And they were really young, mostly just teenagers, and some
Aw.
of them were as young as 12.
Oh, bubbas.
Yep.
So the most vulnerable people in society, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Young female immigrants.
Yes. So I know the Victorian era is like notorious for child factory labour, but this is a factory dealing in dangerous chemicals, and as you said, they're using the labour of the most vulnerable people. Poor, uneducated immigrant women and children.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Nice, Brian and May.
Real classy, really great, and really in line with your Quaker ideals. They were, of course, paying them a pittance and making them work in the most horrifying conditions.
Okay.
And because there were so many people looking for work and no workplace safety regulations existed, workers were seen as entirely disposable.
Right.
So if you were killing your workers
It didn't
with
matter.
the work they were doing, you didn't
There were
care.
more.
Always going to be more. The women worked from 6:30 in the morning in summer or 8 a.m. in winter until 6 p.m. and they were standing the whole time.
Oh my God. It's like a 12-hour day in summer.
Yeah. Yeah. They even took their breaks standing at their workstations, which meant they were eating amongst the chemicals.
Oh no.
Yep. Those using machinery were told to never mind their fingers because the work was more important than their physical safety.
Wow.
They were frequently hit by their foreman for perceived infractions. And for all of this, they were paid wages of between 4 and 8 shillings a week, depending on whether they were making the matches or packaging them.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Do we know what the average salary was back then?
I could not find that out.
Okay.
But it seems like this was very little.
Yeah.
So it gets worse. Not only did they have to house, feed, and clothe themselves with that money, with most of them living on bread and butter and tea for every meal, and couldn't even afford the luxury of shoes. So it seems like it was a really tiny wage.
Jesus.
But they also had a series of fines levied on them, which came out of those wages.
What?
Yep.
For what?
There were fines for being late, 5 pennies, 3 penny fines for having an untidy workbench, talking, or having dirty feet. First, you don't pay them enough to afford shoes, and then you fine them for having dirty feet.
So hang on, how much do they get paid a week?
4 to 8 shillings. And then
they get fined 5 pennies. Okay.
I don't know how many pennies are in a shilling. But basically, this just kept them trapped in this awful poverty cycle.
Oh my God, that's dreadful.
You could be fined a whole shilling for having a burnt match on your workbench.
What?
Yeah, which for some women was a quarter of their week's wages.
And if they just ignite when they hit anything.
Yep.
Yeah.
How often do you think they had burnt matches? Probably a lot. So if you accidentally had 4 burnt matches on your table, you could lose your whole week's wage. Yeah.
Oh.
The women who worked boxing up the matches had to pay the boys who bought them the frames from the drying ovens.
No.
And had to supply their own glue and brushes out of their wages, which were a tiny pittance already.
Oh my goodness.
It is awful. One woman who dropped a tray of matches was fined 6 pennies.
Oh my God.
Which, from what I can tell, they were still usable. They didn't, all ignite.
Oh.
She just dropped these and then had to pick them up and they were like, 6 pennies. How dare you drop a thing?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay.
But by far, the worst and most infamous part of being a match girl was the risk of contracting phossy jaw.
Phossy jaw.
Yes.
Phossy jaw.
Known to medical people as biophosphate-induced osteonecrosis of the jaw, it was the horrifying condition where the white phosphorus the women were working with got into their jaw bones and caused it to rot and decay.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh. So what, does your jaw just dissolve?
Yeah, basically.
Ooh.
So throughout your life, the cells in your bones are constantly dying off and being replaced.
Okay.
And phosphorus interrupts the process.
Oh.
And because the bones around your teeth and your jaw turn over more rapidly than in other parts of your body, that was where it would first show up and it was more susceptible to phosphorus toxicity.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And they were eating.
Exactly. They were standing at these tables amongst all these chemicals, eating, putting the phosphorus directly into their mouths.
Oh my God.
Dissolving their jaws one bite at a time.
I really need this light at the end of the tunnel, Claire. When's the union
we'll
coming?
There. So having phossy jaw was really gross and painful and kind of weird, despite its cute nickname that they gave it because it was so damn common. The beginning symptoms of osteonecrosis of the jaw include toothaches, swollen gums, loose teeth, and an abscess around the infection. Teeth fall out and the bone under the non-healing tissue becomes exposed.
Ugh.
And the affected bones glow in the dark.
Oh my God.
Yep. Because phosphorus glows. It's
so
what
you
is used
open
for
your mouth and your
bioluminescence.
teeth are just... Oh!
Yeah, all the exposed bits of your jawbone are glowing through your rotten gums.
Sweet Jesus.
It's gross. Eventually, the decaying tissue rots away, causing a foul odour.
Oh,
and the only treatment was amputation. Yep. If the affected bone wasn't amputated, the rot often spread to the brain, leading to a particularly painful and horrific death.
Great. I'm glad they're getting paid so well.
Yeah, all that compensation for that suffering. Woo. Do you know what's even worse?
No, I don't.
Bryant and May were fully aware of phossy jaw.
Oh my goodness.
Yep. If a worker complained of a toothache, they had to have their teeth removed immediately or be sacked because Bryant and May knew that meant
it would spread.
Yep. They were like, cool, you're going to die anyway, you're causing too much trouble, go away. We'll find someone else that we can slowly kill.
Wow.
Okay. Yep. So by 1890, 60 tons of white phosphorus was being used in the matchmaking industry. 50% of which was being used by Bryant and May.
Wow.
Yep. There was an alternative to this.
No.
The much safer red phosphorus, which is what we use today to make safety matches.
Why didn't they use it?
Because it was more expensive and people didn't like them because you couldn't strike them anywhere. You had to use the ignition strip on the box.
How inconvenient.
I know. Ugh. So they just kept going ahead with white phosphorus.
Jesus.
And killing women, because who cares when you can light a match anywhere? So that was the state of play in 1888, which would cause anyone to strike.
Yeah.
But this wasn't the first time the match workers had protested their working conditions.
Okay.
There had been some organised political action in the 1870s and 80s when match workers protested a tax that was going to be levied on matches.
Okay.
They were worried that increased costs would lower demand and therefore production, leading to staff cuts. Which, considering how hard it was to find a job in East London at the time, makes sense. They were really worried that
they would lose their jobs and never find one again.
Yeah, and if you're only living off bread and tea and butter,
you don't have
that's
a buffer.
still better than nothing. So, they were basically out in defence of their jobs.
Yeah.
And that protest was successful. And because Queen Vicky wrote to the Prime Minister and was like, yeah, no, this match tax thing is causing too much trouble.
Wow.
Yeah. But the matchmakers went on other strikes in 1881, 85 and 86, which were all unsuccessful.
Okay.
And those strikes were over low wages and this punitive fine structure, which seemed to be a bigger concern to them than their safety.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe they kind of thought they were going to die young anyway.
Yep.
That's depressing.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Also in 1882, employees threw bricks and stones in protest at the unveiling of a statue of William Gladstone, the Prime Minister, which had been funded through their wage cuts.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
They were like, fuck this statue, it's ours, we're going to fuck it up.
Yeah, good on them.
Yeah.
Ugh.
So what changed in the 1888 strike was the arrival of Annie Besant.
Ooh, who's Annie Besant?
Well, she was a socialist,
Great.
a women's rights activist, an ardent supporter of both Irish and Indian self-rule, and a prolific author.
Awesome. She sounds great.
She's so cool. She was a divorced lady living in Victorian England.
The coolest.
Yeah, she'd married a clergyman and then they disagreed over, like, religious views and they separated because of it.
Aww.
Yeah.
What's her name again?
Annie Besant.
Annie Besant. Great.
She was also a member of the Fabian Society, which is a British socialist organisation.
Yes.
Besant was also very middle class.
Okay, Besant.
So the narrative of this strike is usually, nice middle class lady finds out that some women work in terrible conditions and swoops in and saves them.
Uh-huh.
It's obviously not that simple.
No.
So at a Fabian Society meeting, Besant heard about the monster profits posted by Bryant and May that year. And she'd also heard through her friend and fellow socialist Herbert Burrows about the horrible working conditions in the factory.
And she put two and two together.
And she was like, da fuck. So she went down to the factory to investigate and stood outside the gates and managed to convince some of the women to talk to her. And they told her what it was really like working there. And she was appalled.
Yeah.
And so she decided to use the power she had and the platform she had, which was a weekly paper of her own creation called The Link.
Nice.
And on the 23rd of June, 1888, she published an article about the working conditions in the factory.
Nice one, Annie.
Yeah, it was a shocking expose that likened the Bow Road factory to a prison house and described the match girls as white-wage slaves, undersized, helpless, and oppressed.
Great.
Yep. Bryant and May were pissed off. They tried to bully the match workers into denying the revelations.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And wanted them to sign a statement contradicting Besant's claims.
Oh, that's so underhanded.
Yeah, totally, right?
Jeez.
So manipulative.
Yuck.
So because of that, and because they fired a woman who they accused of being the ringleader, the women were enraged.
Yeah.
And on the 5th of July, around 200 of them downed tools and flocked towards the offices of the Link on Fleet Street.
Yes!
Yeah, right?
Yes!
In a spirit of revolt against cruel oppression.
Oh, this is so inspiring.
Yes. So Besant met with the women and set up a strike committee.
Great.
And by the end of that first day, when the 200 women had walked out, 1,400 workers had gone on strike.
God,
pretty
that's
big.
amazing.
Yeah, I read one account that said that they had 5,000 people working in the match factory.
Oh, okay.
But
So
it was
like
kind of seasonal, so it's hard to say how many were working at the time. But it's still a large chunk of their workforce.
Yeah,
even
massive.
if 5,000 was the max they had.
Yeah, 1,500's heaps.
Yeah. So Besant was actually a bit dismayed that things had escalated so quickly and that the workers had all walked out.
Because she couldn't organise.
Well, because she was worried that there was, no organisation and no strike fund to support the workers.
Yeah.
And so she was really worried how they would be impacted by this because she was like, there's no forward planning here.
No.
Bryant May realised that shit was getting real, so they offered to reinstate the fired employee, but the women demanded other concessions as well, particularly in relation to this unfair fine system.
Yes.
They were unimpressed by the response from management, and by the 6th of July, the whole factory was on strike.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
I know. So Frederick Bryant, the managing director of the company, was livid, particularly with Besant, because poor, uneducated factory workers couldn't possibly have made their own choice about any of this, and she's obviously the only one to blame. He threatened to break the strike with scabs and denounced what he called the twaddle of Mrs. Besant and other socialists in the press and issued threats of legal action.
Should we just clarify what a scab is for the listeners, just in case someone doesn't know?
Yes, it's someone who crosses a picket line and breaks a strike to work for a company that people are striking against.
And they're often really desperate people, right?
Yes.
Because they're people who really, really need the money to the point where they're willing to probably take worse conditions than even the workers had.
People who are striking hate them and call them scabs because they see them as undermining their cause.
Yes.
Because if a company can get other workers in, they don't have to worry about what the strikers are saying.
The strikers have no power.
Yes.
Yeah.
So with this threat of legal action, Besant printed another edition of the link and said, "Bring it, Bryant, fucking sue me."
Yes.
Yeah. She said, "Better to sue me than to sack poor defenseless women."
Oh, good one.
Yes, that is how you be an ally. You put yourself in front of the people who are most vulnerable.
Yes.
You let them speak, but then you defend them against shitty attacks like this.
Yes.
Yes. So she and Herbert Burrows, at the request of the workers, helped them set up a union and went about organising a strike fund to support all the workers.
Brilliant.
Which is good. So Besant put out an appeal in the link, again, for donations, and other sympathetic publications did the same, and their middle-class readership heeded the call and the donations started rolling in.
More allies.
Yes. They even got the support of the London Trades Council, which had traditionally only represented skilled craftsmen and had rejected associations with unskilled labourers. Yeah.
Because they were women, mostly?
Partly, but it was more just a snobbery thing of like, oh, but you don't have like a skill, right? So no.
Okay.
They donated £20 to the strike fund and offered to act as mediators between the strikers and the employer.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So at the time, electric lighting wasn't widespread and most people were still using matches to light all this shit all the time. Yeah. Which meant that the match lobby was really powerful.
Okay.
So this fight between poor working class women and this huge behemoth of a company really captured people's attention, which meant it was all over the press. So in an interview in the Times on the 9th of July, 1888, Mr. Bryant claimed that he had always, quote, wanted to see his people well paid and that the girls earn between 5 and 18 shillings a week.
Lies!
Right? And the same article...
Maybe 5.
Yeah,
not
most.
18.
The same article reported that Mrs. Besant had said in a public demonstration that the women actually earn between 4 and 13 shillings, and that this was scandalous when Mr. Bryant had recently bought himself a park worth £170,000.
Oh, ho, ho, ho.
Yeah, and like that article still ignores the fact that the women rarely took home even that small amount because of all the fines.
Fined all the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there were meetings, demonstrations, and a group of 50 match workers went to Parliament to meet with 3 MPs on the 11th of July.
Wow.
Charles Bradlaugh MP spoke in Parliament in support of the strikers.
Cool.
Yes, they got people really paying attention, and it was a huge thing that was like everyone knew about.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. So the strike committee formulated a list of demands to put forward to Bryant and May. They wanted fines, deductions for cost of materials and other unfair deductions to be abolished, and that in the future grievances could be taken straight to the management without having to involve the foreman, who had prevented the management from knowing of previous complaints.
Okay.
Also, very importantly, meals were to be taken in a separate room where food would not be contaminated with phosphorus.
And maybe they can sit down?
Yeah, maybe. We'll see. At the invitation of the strike committee, the London Trades Council arranged a meeting with Bryant and May, who conceded to almost all of the women's demands.
Brilliant.
And so the match workers returned to work the next day after 3 weeks of being on strike.
Oh, nice one.
Yeah.
That's so exciting.
Yeah. So this organisation and bargaining power didn't disappear after the strike like it normally did.
Okay.
The Union of Women's Matchmakers was formed, and on the 27th of July, 1888, their inaugural meeting was held, where Annie Besant was elected their first secretary.
Oh, this is so heartwarming.
I know! The union lasted until 1903, which is amazing, considering that as late as 1914, less than 10% of female workers were unionized.
Wow.
So to have a female-specific union kicking
really
around until
impressive.
1903 is, yeah.
Yeah.
This strike started off the rise of unskilled unionism or new unionism across the country and led to changes for thousands of other workers.
Okay.
Historian Pauline Gregg writes, "The victory of these hitherto unorganized and lowly girls struck a spark all over the lower ranks of labour."
Nicely worded.
Yeah. In 1889, a gas workers and general labourers union was formed and won an 8-hour day.
Yes.
In August of the same year, a 60,000-strong dockers' strike pretty much closed an entire stretch of the Thames for over a month.
Holy moly.
Yeah, and was accompanied by dozens of other stoppages. Wow. And not only did these women change their working conditions, they changed middle and upper class people's perceptions of the working class and the poor. They were no longer passive, unskilled pawns in the economy. They were organised and powerful.
That's amazing.
One woman observed the strike funds being distributed and said with surprise, quote, "Few people could fail to be touched by the ways in which the girls were determined to stand together at all costs. In every direction, girls might be seen plotting how they could help one another on until Bryant and May gave them back their pennies."
Oh!
Yeah.
Oh,
how good.
That's wonderful.
So it wasn't until 1908, though, that the House of Commons passed an act prohibiting the use of white phosphorus in matches after December 1910.
Interesting.
Yes.
Glad that happened, I guess.
But it seemed that, like workplace practices did prevent the extreme rates of phossy jaw that had been happening.
Okay.
But yeah, we still were really into those lucifer matches for a really long time.
Oh dear. They do sound fun, but not at the cost of people's jaws.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the Match Girl strikes of 1888. They were fucking badass.
That was so cool,
Thank
Claire.
you.
I'm so glad I know about that now.
Right?
That's awesome.
Yeah, I knew about phossy jaw. I'd heard about that and I'd heard about, the Match Girls working in awful conditions.
Yeah.
I'd never heard about them striking before. I was like, how is that not the story?
No, that's the main story.
Right?
Oh,
So good.
that's brilliant.
If you want to hear more history tidbits, you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Please rate, review, subscribe so other history buffs can find us.
If you want to know what sources we used, please go to our SoundCloud page. The link is in the description.
Today's homework is to join your union.